Good morning or hi, everybody. We're back to talk about Adam of the Road. You had a couple weeks off of just reading his adventures by yourself, and hopefully you understood more or less of what you were reading. Some of you more, some of you less. I know it's never as much fun when we can't tell the story and read it out loud together. So this week, what I'm going to do is we're going to talk a little bit about where we are in the story and the symbols that the author is using about the road being a place of change on Adam's journey of life, just as we call ours the road of life. And I'm going to preview a few things in the chapters that will help you answer the questions. There are more questions this week to help you stay focused and read carefully, but hopefully this will help you with that. And then tomorrow, I'm going to have you watch a couple short videos, and we're going to talk about how the English language was changing and developing. Way back at the beginning, we said we were going to study the etymology, or how the English language had changed. And tomorrow I'm going to talk to you about a very important piece of literature that was written at the time of the setting of this story in real life, called Canterbury Tales. So I'll save that for tomorrow, and I'll do a video explaining Canterbury Tales, giving you some samples of what that Middle English sounded like, which I think you'll be surprised how different it sounds from the way we speak today, and also kind of just summarize what it was all about. Okay, so pause the video right now if you do not have your book and your questions for this week. All right, and then I'm going to keep going. So what happened last week mostly, Adam ended up traveling and going to the fair with Don Williams. You read about his adventures and how they got attacked by robbers, all of that. And then how he went on with Don Williams, and while he was at an inn, after he was at an inn, he came across a miracle play, and he began watching it from up on a wall. And then hopefully all of you haven't seen your answers yet. I'll pick up those papers on Monday. But while Adam was watching a miracle play about the garden, about the fall into sin of Adam and Eve, and watching the demons come up, and it was all quite exciting, kind of like a movie today, he fell off the wall. And I asked you what was ironic about that. Hopefully you said Adam falling off a wall was ironic because he was watching the fall of Adam. I'm sure you all got that. But some things began to change while he was there. And while he was unconscious and with this bad concussion, Dame Prudence and Master Wallace, who were sister and brother, a nun and a priest that worked together at the church, took care of him. And they're very kind. They loved him. But something comes up in the story at that point about their opinion of music. And so as Adam gets better and he has no way to repay them, he tries to, well, first of all, they take away his clothes and give him a robe that makes him look like a monk. And they take away his harp, and because they thought his clothes were too colorful and worldly, and they wanted him to look like a nice Christian boy. And what they didn't know is Adam's dad had given him that coat or that minstrel. And that's what you wore if you were a minstrel. Kind of like if you're a mechanic, you wear overalls, or if you're an executive, you wear a suit. Well, if you're a minstrel, you dress like this. If you go out in a robe looking like a clerk, nobody's going to believe that you're a minstrel. But anyway, he loves them, he respects them, and and so at one point he tries to sing some things that he thinks they would like to entertain and bless them, and he discovers, much to his surprise, that they actually don't think he should sing any of those songs, and they're uncomfortable, and they finally say that they think he should only sing in the church choir, and his music should only be Christian music that glorifies God. And that's a big debate today. You know, what's permissible for us as Christians? Do we have to only listen to Christian music? Can we listen to classical music? Can we listen to Celtic music? Can we listen to folk songs that just talk about life? Is there a Christian kind of music only, or is all music something that God created, and as long as it is as long as it represents the world as it is and in a godly and biblical way, is it okay to sing about love and children and dogs and cats? So that begins to come up in the story. It's one of the things that the author explores. What is secular, meaning not of the church, and Christian? And in those days, there was a very strong divide. You were either a nun or a priest or a monk, and that's how you served God, or you were a regular person. And the idea of the holiness of every vocation being something that you can do all that you do to the glory of God, that was one of the reformers' ideas. John Calvin, actually, in the 1500s, he was one of the first to say, wait a minute, no, you can serve God just as gloriously scrubbing the kitchen sink and changing diapers as you can being a priest. All of the vocations in life and all callings can be something that glorifies God. We all think that way today. That was really changing then. So Adam's having to think about his calling. Is he called to be a minstrel? Does he want to be a clerk? And so you see that at the end of the story, he meets or the end of that chapter, he meets some minstrels and they take off. He decides that he's going to leave and go to find Roger. And as much as he loves and respects Dame Prudence and Master Wallace, he doesn't want to stay there and become a clerk. But he very kindly leaves them a present and he takes off with the DeVessis. So here's where Adam's growing up and his journey begins to change, because now he's thinking about his calling and what is the right kind of music and minstrel to be. And now he's hanging out with some minstrels. And so I want to begin by reading. I asked you to have your book. I want to look at page 236 and 237 and read a little bit. So I'm in the hue and cry. I'll explain what that is in a minute. But I want to read about these minstrels, the DeVessis, because I've asked you to compare and to contrast Roger and Adam and the DeVessis. How has Roger taught Adam to be, and what kind of minstrel is Roger compared to what kind of minstrel are the DeVessis? So starting on page 236 at the bottom, last chapter. If Roger had been there, he and Adam would have spent many a warm, happy evening with all kinds of people at all kinds of firesides, great and simple. But the DeVessis rarely got into people's houses. Why was that? We'll talk about it. They did their stunts and they told their stories out in the marketplace or the green. Jack would talk about the revolt of Wales and King Edward going to quell it, with the aid of the barons who held the land in the marshes. But then when the people found out they knew no more about it than everybody else did, they paid no attention to him. Sometimes the DeVessis got a few halfpence, but when dusk came and they knocked at a house door, they were usually turned away. At the small houses, when they were told there was no room and there was nothing they could do, and at the big houses, Jack would demand a minstrel's right of entrance. So there was actually kind of a law that said there were no hotels, no place for people to stay. So if a minstrel came dressed as a minstrel with his instrument and he said, "Hey, I'm a minstrel, can you let me stay?" you were supposed to give them a right to stay there. But Roger looked respectable. He dressed well. He had good manners. His speech was good. The DeVessis looked kind of shabby, a little scary, hoodies over their heads. Maybe they didn't speak as well. So people opened their doors and said, no thanks, go away. And so they rarely got into people's houses. Take note of that. That's how the author describes that the DeVessis didn't look quite up to the part. Then Adam, it said, longed more and more for it says they slept in barns if they were lucky, and under hedges or haystacks. They were often hungry and cold. Yet Roger always got into people's homes, and they'd be fed well, he would entertain them, and they never worried about having a place to stay, because Roger looked professional. And that's the way Adam's been trained. He's starting to see, there are my dad always told me I should behave this way, but now I'm seeing what these other people behave like, right? Your parents always told you should behave this way, and now you're on a soccer team listening to the other kids' language, or you're at church, or you're in the neighborhood, and you're going, oh, yeah, now I kind of get what my parents were talking about. I'm not supposed to be like that, and there's a good reason. Adam longed more and more for Rogers. The DeVessis were jolly people and kind in their way, but they made him as uncomfortable as Master Wallace and Dame Alice did, but for very different reasons. They were always promising and never delivering, never doing. People that say, oh, yeah, but then when it comes to it, they don't keep their word. This very afternoon, they would declare, Adam shall tell one of his tales, and tomorrow we will surely start for London. But when the afternoon came, Jack was noisily roaring out his own coarse stories. That means they were a little bit on the, dirty side, making jokes about things they shouldn't. And the boys were turning somersaults. Adam never had a chance to lift his voice. Instead, he had to play tunes to his harp to attract attention. I'm going to skip ahead. Next paragraph. The stories that Jack told were not at all like the ones that Roger used to tell. They were short, exaggerated tales, mostly making rude jokes about the friars and monks and the rich abbots, meaning the church. Now, Adam knew that the friars were often greedy and untruthful, and monks sometimes varied the holy life with chess playing and hunting, and sometimes they ate and drank too much. But he knew they were priests and in the church, and he didn't feel good making jokes about them. People like the stories we tell, Andrew said, when Adam objected. You have to tell people what they want. You pretend to be a minstrel. You ought to know that. Today there are probably 99% of the movies that are made your parents wouldn't let you see. But why do other people see them? And why do movie makers make violent, graphic, ugly, coarse, terrible language? Why do they do that? You know why they do it? They say, that's what people want to see, so we make it. And guess what? They're right. People go see it. And so that same argument is going on here. The minstrels are saying, well, people like this. That's what they want to see. That's the way they talk, so we just give them what they want. At first, that sounded the way like Roger used to say, a minstrel must fit his tale to his listeners. But when Adam thought it over, he decided it was quite different. Roger told tales that fitted the good in people. Tales about courage and danger and adventure and love. Well, anyhow, Adam persisted, Roger got a war horse for his tales, and that's more than Jack ever did. Now, he was sorry the minute he said it, because of course they didn't like that. Another thing that happened next page, Adam had no instrument of his own, so he was Andrew, one of the DeVessis, so he was forever borrowing Adam's harp. That was another thing that made Adam uneasy, but he didn't like to refuse it. He was always borrowing and not paying back. And so, one day they were sitting on the bank of the Forest of Holt outside of Farnham, a little town. Andrew was plunking away at the harp. Adam looked up over his head and wished that the berries were edible. They had had nothing to eat all day, and it was past dinner time. So what happens now is they start talking about hunting. They wish that they could go hunting, but on the next page, it says that they saw some minstrels at the top of 240. They passed some minstrels without, I'll stop at the start of the bottom of 239. All along the road came 3 men in shabby green with some bows and arrows. Think Robin Hood. And behind them, there was another on a black horse carrying a deer over his saddle, with its legs sticking out on each side. The 2 boys followed, leading greyhounds, 4 white, 2 tawny, and 2 red. So those were hunting dogs. They passed the minstrels without noticing them, and farther down the road, they turned off on a path going into the forest. When they disappeared, Allison Devesi, one of the girls, gasped. "Oh, they've been hunting in the king's forest." "Well, I wouldn't mind having a good piece of venison, that's deer meat," said Jack with a sigh, and Andrew rubbed his stomach and licked his lips. "If they get caught, they'll be blinded," said Adam. "Oh, that's the least of what will happen to them," said Allison. "Hunting in the king's forest? I wouldn't want to eat venison caught that way anyway, no matter how hungry I was. It's breaking the law." "Venison is venison," said Lawrence, "and they won't get caught. And why should a king or anybody else own miles of forest and say that no hungry man is able to shoot a deer or a rabbit in it for his own dinner?" So this is the problem in those days. The kings, the lords, they owned all the land and the animals in it, and they maintained the roads for people to pass through, but it was illegal to hunt there. And the common people, or the people traveling, they didn't have stores, they couldn't hunt. It wasn't a good law. It was pretty unjust, but it was breaking the law to go into that forest and shoot a deer that didn't belong to you. And so Adam's thinking, I wouldn't do that. That's like stealing. I wouldn't go to my neighbor's yard and kill a turkey because I'm hungry. I would look for a way to find food that wasn't breaking the law. Allison says the same thing. Andrew says, deer meat is deer meat. Nobody's going to care. So what happens later on in the story that sets everything into action is that Andrew comes back with some venison, and they all eat it, and they're all excited, and they're hungry, and their hunger is satisfied, and they don't really think too much about it. And then they decide they're going to go to the next town and try to get there before nightfall so that they can stay with William the Glover, somebody that Adam knew. Well, there's a curfew, and they have to get there before dark. And when they get there, on their way into Farnham, when they get to William the Glover's house, he's not there, and it's after dark. And somebody comes up and asks them what they're doing, and they don't have a good story because Adam didn't know William the Glover had been gone for a while. And suddenly they are about to be arrested. And so the hue and cry is set up, and they take off running, and they get separated, and Adam ends up spending the night alone under a bridge. And yet, before that, he had already realized that the Devesis were not the kind of people that he should hang out with and that he wanted to be with. And so, by circumstance, they end up separating, and Adam is all alone. In chapter 9, so in the questions, let me look real quick at the questions that I'm asking you. So I'm asking you about what the hue and cry is, which I already explained, and what we do today instead. I asked you about curfew and how we use curfews today. And I asked you to tell me the difference between the Devesis and Roger and Adam. So you can go back to those pages that I read from at the beginning of chapter 18, especially page 236, 237, and 238. And then I asked you what Lawrence did that was illegal. And then I asked you, why did Adam decide to leave the Devesis? And I want you to use a quote from chapter 19. So now chapter 19 is News of Roger. And I'm not going to tell you where it is, but right on the first page, he says something, and I want you to quote directly from the book. Why did he want to leave them? And then chapter 19, he's basically on the run, and he's alone again. And right away, you'll see him, while he's lonely, he starts to sing a song, but then he ends up creating one and kind of writing his own song. He's not just remembering and entertaining. He's been doing that. But now, if he's really called to be a minstrel, he begins starting to write his own music. Hey, a musician really does that. And he meets a peddler. So you'll see some of the songs that he writes there. On page 255, he writes a song about what he's going through. And he meets a peddler, and he's kind of lonely. And as he meets this peddler, I'm going to go to page 257. Adam has been creating this song. He sings it for the peddler because he's hungry, and the peddler offers him some food. So all Adam has to offer is his song. So on page 258, the peddler didn't say whether he liked the song or not, but he held out a piece of breast instead of a wing. That meant another piece of chicken. And Adam decided he'd rather have food than praise. Live around here? Asked the peddler. I'm a minstrel, replied Adam proudly. I live on the road. Oh, you don't look much like a minstrel, but you can sing all right. Did you spend the last night in Guilford? Not right in Guilford, Adam replied cautiously. Now, why was he cautious? Because they were the criminals, and the hue and cry had been because the people thought that they were bad guys, and they were on the run from the law, so they didn't get thrown into a jail. He doesn't want to say, well, not right in Guilford, why? Well, which way did you come? Persisted the peddler. Over the hill with the chapel, said Adam. Oh, St. Martha's, you must have been down at Shelford. Did the hue and cry spread there? I don't know, Adam, quaking inside. Did his voice quake? His voice wavered, but he forced himself to go on as carelessly as he could. Did they raise the hue and cry in Guilford? Did they? Now, this is funny. This is why I want to read it out loud. It cracks me up. This is how rumors get started. Well, I was there, and I was out shouting with the rest of them. A band of robbers came in after curfew, and the watch found them trying to break into that new Glover's shop. 10 of them there were, great giants of men. They knocked down the watch and stamped on him. Did they get caught? Adam asked anxiously. Caught? Can you catch a mad bull? All of Guilford was out after them, but nobody could hold them. One of them went past me with his eyes gleaming red in the dark like the king of hell himself. It was all Adam could do not to laugh outright at this picture of 5 frightened, thin minstrels. Adam used to say that the faster news traveled, the bigger it grew. Gossip. Oh, where are they now? Adam asked. The peddler raised his hands and let them drop. Gone, he said dramatically. Clean gone. Probably they have a hideout somewhere. Adam wondered what the peddler would do if he were to say suddenly, one of them is sitting right there beside you right now. Boo! Reluctantly, he gave up the idea, though it would have been fun. At any rate, the Vessies had escaped, and now Adam need think of them no more. So he goes into the inn at the end of the chapter. He gets to the next town, actually the town where he had been before, I believe where he'd lost Roger, and he finds out where Roger is. So I asked you in number 9, he finds out from the innkeeper where he and Roger had stayed before, where Roger was, and it tells right then how long they'd been separated. So I want you to just read carefully on page 261. Where was Roger? Where was he going to be? And at what holiday? And Adam is on his way off to wherever it says to meet London. And in chapter 20, where you see, what have you done with him? Adam takes off to go back to wherever Roger's supposed to be in London. I just gave it away. And when he gets there, he has a surprise because the people that he expects to meet there and he expects to see Roger, another disappointment. He expects to see Hugh and Marjorie and the kids that he used to play with, the Delisle kids, and they're not there. And all that's left is the bailiff's son, and who he didn't like that much when they used to play in the tilting yard, and his cousin Agnes, who is completely awful. And he's stuck there for several months because Roger's not there. And So there's a really funny part that I don't have time to read right now, but I want you to notice on page 268 and 269 how he describes Agnes. I'll just read one tiny little part. She's horrible. She was a bossy, busy, self-satisfied young thing, tossing her long yellow hair proudly and walking with her stomach out. She had light blue eyes, slightly popped, and a red full mouth which she kept pursing up disapprovingly. She called Adam boy, and she ordered him to bring her a stool or a book off a shelf. Her name meant Lamb of God, but to Adam she was no more like a silly sheep, and not a sheep of God either. He occupied dull moments thinking up humiliating accidents for her to fall into, which then he would hide his smile, and contentedly he would answer her derisive remarks with a meaning you're just a sheep. Now, why do I like that? Let me read the next line. It was no way for a minstrel to behave, he realized. But then at the Delisle house, they didn't treat him like a minstrel. He was just a tiresome boy who had been left in their care. So he struggles a little, but why do I like that? Because I like that Adam's a real person, and that when he's faced with a bossy, disagreeable, rotten person who doesn't want to be nice, he has it in him to be a little bit mean. Just saying. He knows it's wrong, but he has it in him. And I like that part of the story. So I ask you to, at the end of this chapter, who does he run into? And what does he find out about what happened to Nick? And finally, I want you to tell me some of the ways that Adam has grown up that we've talked about. Now, at the end of your page, I'm going to have you write 3 more things that are not on this page, but you have to watch tomorrow's video, and I will tell you at the end of tomorrow's video what those 3 things are that you're going to write, and they're all worth several points, so you're not going to want to miss those. So stay tuned for tomorrow. I'll see you then.